Happy February 2021, everyone. It's great to be back with you. My name is Kellee Franklin. I am a strategy and innovation consultant, clients all over the globe. And I am very excited to be back with you today. These videos I started at the outset of the global pandemic, and they've been very useful and helpful for those of you in my network. And today I have a very special guest, someone that I have gotten connected to through the strategy and innovation and former big firm community, Ash Richardson. And I'm really delighted and think that you will quite enjoy our time together today. Ash has a former Accenture background. I come from Booz Allen background. And we can share our, I guess, our war stories. But he's got a really great insight and perspective to not only what we're going through currently, but he authored an article, and that was what prompted my invitation to reach out to Ash and see if he would like to spend some time together to share his insights to help you not only navigate where we have been and where we're going post-COVID, but also just some reflections that he's had on his time at Accenture. So what I understand about stratapp is that it's an app that's designed to help companies, and the 4 areas which I get pretty jazzed about are culture elevation, next generation ready, employee productivity, and business performance. So those are all 4 areas I think that each one of us can say are important aspects pre-COVID, and certainly as we move into the next phase of creating our workforces. But I'm going to let Ash introduce himself and tell a little bit more about stratapp and what he has done throughout his career. So Ash, thank you so much for dialing in and being here today.
Yeah, thank you, Kellee. And hello to everyone from Mooloolaba Beach. So that's in Australia, Queensland, just down the road from where we're recording this, where I live. And yeah, I've been lucky enough. The time at Accenture was in London, which got me working across Europe and the US. And before that, I had a operations background in the military and studied along the way, and ended up Oyster Partners in the UK, which got me into digital and then venture capital. So Oyster Partners is now Digitas, a large digital media company. So that's the interest in user experience and design and so forth. And stratapp is the world's first app to bring running the company together into one experience. And that expression from consulting, you know, we say you should be working on the business, not in it all of the time. And really there's nowhere to do that. We have apps for finance, CRM, procurement, HR, but no one's really solved bringing the whole thing together in terms of running the company. And that's what stratapp does.
Well, that's what I think is amazing. Just you've taken all of this experience that you've had, not only at Accenture, but all of these new ventures, and been able to say what really matters and what's important, what can really be helpful to help companies be their best selves, I guess.
Yeah, and to be fair, like there's lots of people, not just me, you know, I've been able to pull it together and have the joy of getting into the detail. But there's been a lot of brainstorming from all different people behind the product over a couple of years. And I think the interesting thing for me is the learning has come from some of the strangest places, right? So doing a lot of outsourcing work in East Europe and Asia opened my eyes to what was happening with Basecamp, and then later Trello, and then plenty of apps have copied that Trello experience. So it's interesting where you learn how collaboration is happening by partnering with companies that are in, you know, far off places serving the US market or the UK market, and watching how they work and manage distributed teams to serve international clients who are also remote. And that's probably the greatest thinking behind the app, as well as the classical training from Accenture and, you know, running companies before that.
Yeah, and I know we talked about it. I'm really impressed. You're currently working with leadership teams from across 8 countries, and As we have, when I talk about we, the collective we of my network, and I'm sure your network as well, have been talking about, you know, what's going to happen when COVID disappears. But we understand as people who work with these multinational corporations that it's really disrupting the traditional factory model of how employees are showing up at work. And what I'm curious to hear from you is, you know, what kind of hard evidence are you noticing and seeing, and how do you see this playing out from not only a technology perspective, but a commercial property perspective? And is there anyone that you either have worked with directly or that you just in your research have come across that you admire how they're handling the present situation?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, on property, like I live at this beautiful place at the beach where everyone comes on vacation normally, you know, so
Yeah.
we're normally busy twice or three times a year. And all of a sudden, the property market's gone ballistic because so many people in Melbourne and Sydney and Brisbane, which is an hour and a half south, have obviously negotiated the option to work remotely and to visit the office once a month. And of course, they'd rather live at the beach than in the city. And we've been negotiating with an investor in London who has seen exactly the same thing happening in the UK. There's beautiful places in England to live without the 1 hour commute on the train to work, you know, and so people are vacating London really, really quickly. In terms of what we're seeing around the world, it's actually seems to be like two extremes, really. There's so many companies like our own where there was zero impact on the operating model. So you're already working remotely, you're used to the collaboration tech and that space and jumping on calls and huddles twice a day or whatever it is. And you just flow with that rhythm. And so for companies like us, it's been zero disruption, except for offshore locations no longer going to the office and, you know, making sure they've got the tech and the infrastructure, but really no disruption. But then you see, of course, for most companies, it's been really disruptive. And then meeting people describing, you know, thinking of one CEO in the US, just 1,500 employees, describing how so many people feel lonely now, working at home, or get off the video call and then kind of a bit lost what to do next, that sort of sensation. And then the other side of that too, feeling that sometimes the video calls and the multiple chat messaging is almost like tracking them or trying to keep an eye on them. And there's an IPO coming up with some old-fashioned tracking software that's been rebadged, which I think is just a terrible story to see that happening. But the thing with stratapp though is it's just not about messaging and chat and live video. It's like giving the work a context and connecting the day-to-day work to what you're trying to do that month or quarter or an ongoing strategic initiative, and then all of that sitting below a tree. So I think more and more people need context, and we had no idea about COVID when we started this journey building this product, because we're trying to solve how companies can run better. You know, it's been 30 years the same model: top down, targets, PowerPoint, Excel, quarterly meetings, retrospective, looking back, making excuses, trying to pretend we did what we set out to achieve. You get this sort of all these funny dynamics between the board, senior CEOs, senior management, and frontline staff, and of course middle management stuck in the middle trying to please two audiences. And it's just been that way forever. And it's funny, we started the journey solving this problem thinking about 2015, 2017, doing research and concept designs and things. And then at the end of 2018, you start to see HBR organ publications in the US talking more about this issue. And then in the last 6 months, there's conversations in the US, I'm talking the investment community, venture capital, tech, right? Talking about, wow, we really need a business operating system. Or there's a new phrase, which I really like, coined around deep collaboration. So forget messaging, chat, noise, and, you know, shared spaces. How do you organize the collaboration around the work and what needs to be done? Which I'm hearing this now going, wow, it's stratapp, right? Like the market is talking, you know, and we had no idea about COVID, and I didn't really think the market would be talking about this problem so soon. And here we are live and obviously partnering, raising capital in the US and set to go. So it's been good for us. In terms of the last part of your question, who do I admire the most? it's someone who probably has had minimal impact, and it's that Matt Munnenweg, who is the founder of WordPress.com. So that's, you know, spun out from the original WordPress org. And then they bought Tumblr, I think 2 years ago in New York, and kept the office there for a little while because that culture was still go to the office when they bought Tumblr. And then, of course, over time, all those employees in New York have realized, hang on a minute, the parent company has 1,200 employees across 75 countries. And he did a great podcast with Sam Harris, which is actually on our website on the blog page. You can find it there. It's Sam Harris interviewed Matt, and he's describing how he's pulled this thing off, right? 1,200 employees, 75 countries, and how they hold it all together. Yeah. And then that journey of doing acquisitions and bringing other cultures into working the same way. And then I love the story where he describes we kind of just had to keep the office to raise capital, really. So investors had somewhere to visit us, you know, and really, and then the ins and outs of making people feel included, valued, and part of the culture when you're running this. It's not remote. It's he calls it distributed working, because they're not remote from anything, right? That's just their model, is to be distributed. And everything he's talking about there around live meeting notes and process and how you tie things together to a bigger purpose. It's, again, just talking to the designer stratapp. Not that I've managed to get him as a client yet. We swapped some notes. That's about
maybe after this video gets
yeah, sure. No, he's read the my summary of the podcast and a few other things, but haven't won him over yet.
So I wanted to follow up with you on your reflections of what you've been noticing throughout the past year, and such a diverse, cadre of things, not only from a social perspective, a human factor perspective, but technologically, there have been all sorts of things, and different types of industries fall into different camps. Some more prepared to handle what we've just experienced, and they've done really well, and others have really been crippled, if not completely closed. So as a professional like myself, who's in this business, who works with clients that can cover often that entire continuum of people who are, really able to, take off during this particular crisis that was presented, and some that are really thinking, gosh, we've got to totally pivot. What are your thoughts on setting strategy, objectives, and execution for these types of companies that we're dealing with and clients?
Yeah, so I'm seeing that the speed of adapting changes, and it comes down to the personality of the company and the qualities of the leaders. So I can't really pull out trends in the US versus, say France or Germany or Scandinavia. I do have to admire the Scandinavians, just their ability to focus and remove all the noise and get things done that are important and bring folks along. They just have a real skill at doing that. Whereas so many other cultures seem to be consumed with running to meeting, call to call, and everyone's so busy and less productive. That's my high level view on it. When we're going through that sort of onboarding experience, you learn so much about the clients, right? Because they're trying to go from old-fashioned static documents and strategy nowhere really sitting anywhere, and then everyone working in different places, to then, right, let's do that in stratapp. So when you see that journey, you see all sorts of things, right? Behavior, culture, adaptation, and of course you're being very polite. And we're not a consulting company, we're a product company. So we're really just trying to get them going. If they need more help, introduce folks that can help. So I do wish sometimes we had more time, to invest with the customers. Because of my background in consulting, I can see all the things I can help with. But at the end of the day, our role is just trying to get them started, and then they'll go on their own journey. I think the biggest lesson is we get caught in this conversation around we sort of bring everything down to sort of quick fixes and tangible things that we can talk about, right? And I think the real issue is if you go on LinkedIn for example, when you type in radical transparency, Ray Dalio, or you read the 100 posts a day about culture and building culture and leadership. And the truth is, when you put a product in front of folks that makes everything transparent and live and connects the whole level, you can lock it down in stratapp, or really the default is, let's make it all open so that you've got 200 employees or 500 or 5,000 can all see what's happening, who's doing what, and moving in the same direction. Now, what leader or shareholder or investor or CEO would not want that, right? It's so obvious that's how a company should run. And more importantly, it's how the next generation think, right? They didn't grow up like us, protecting our drafts, collecting other people's ideas, running little workshops, massaging the document to make sure it didn't annoy too many people, trying to get things pre-approved before you shared it too widely. That whole old school way of running companies, which is, by the way, that's the folks that are at the top now, because that's the age group, right? That's how they were sort of brought up. And you look at the way the next generation work, and I'm talking from 18 to 30 particularly, who are like, their drafts are public, everything's flowing, different people are contributing, they're not precious at all about who thought of what, where it came from. Very, very open, not worried about feedback or what others think. They receive it more gracefully than
I think it's given more gracefully too. So I think as compared to maybe when you and I were in the big firm.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's true. There was no doubt. It was tough love when you join when you join those firms as a young person. It's tough love and great learning, right? But I think the hardest thing for us is once we get a client live and working in the app, they totally fall in love with it. And then all the communication with us is about what's next, what's coming, are you going to do this? Could you have, it's all roadmap. Totally love the product, but getting them started, and particularly getting the leadership team to go, hey, let's just be open, put it all in here, work live in one place. The next generation and the folks typically working for them embrace it really quickly.
That's great. Yeah.
And that's because that's the mindset of that next generation.
Yeah.
And they come to work going, where can I help? Where can I get involved? What can I learn? And what I love about that generation is they're not pretending. They're not pretending to be busy. If they're not busy, their feet's on the desk and they're listening, their feet are on the desk, they're listening to music, right? So when you create an environment digitally, doesn't matter whether you distribute it or in the same office, if everyone can see everything and it's organized, then that generation just loves to volunteer and contribute and get involved. And that creates really great effect up through, middle management. What CEO wouldn't want it, right? And but the cold hard truth to your question is, it's not about COVID or change, it's about learning to lead differently. And even when you put a product in front of folks that just solves this for you, right? All you got to do is put your 3 goals in there, set some objectives for the quarter, collaborate live on the work, keep your ongoing projects, just make it all transparent and organized around the org design as well, right?
Yeah. I agree with
you. The Holy
you.
Grail. It's the Holy Grail, but the changes.
And the world that you and I grew up in with human-centered design thinking, and some of those terminologies have evolved as you and I have gone through our careers, but some of those principles we've applied. And one of the reasons why I think we were, at least I was attracted to your work is because I heard so much of the things that I really believe in. But when you talk about collaboration and creating more of a consultative type of environment where things are shared and feedback is welcomed, and, from a design thinking perspective, we emphasize how important diversity and empathy is. And those two things need to happen for innovation, I think, to thrive. And what you're describing there is really like a mental mind shift from, more of a controlled type of space to something that's much more open and freedom flowing. So I love it. I love that.
Yeah. And, that whole ethos of tapping into talent at all levels And and I love what Elon Musk talks about, right? Sure, you've got a hierarchy to approve expense claims or to make decisions on budget allocation. Sure, there's a hierarchy, but the flow of ideas and collaboration,
come from everywhere.
You've got to flatten it, right? And of course, all switching over to 20 different chat channels on Slack or Teams, right? It's not the answer, right? It feels good for the first few months of COVID, right? We're all connected. But you realize very quickly, it's like running 200 Trello boards. I love Trello. What a great product. And, 22 companies have taken that thinking into their SaaS product, from even practice management and accounting to CRMs, and we've certainly done it as well. It's a brilliant way to think, but you can't run a company on 200 Trello boards, right? It's got to be organized around, first of all, the org chart, functions, horizontals, verticals, geography, but more importantly, around what are we trying to achieve? And my best onboarding question now, right? I'm trying to break through this. How do you get the leaders sort of thinking this way? Is to say, hey, I love sailing. Go sailing in that beach behind me, every week, twice a week, no, at least once a week. And so let's pretend you're the CEO and you're going to go sailing for the next 18 months, and you're going to hand the company to me, and we're going to have no communication. So just what do you want me to get done in the next 18 months? Let's just verb noun, the old consulting, right? Verb noun, 3 goals written in verb noun, or 4 goals. Just tell me what it is you want me to achieve. And it takes a while for people to answer that question, right? So if you're at the bottom of 8 levels of management, below that, where's your context? Or
the waters get choppy.
The waters get choppy, So
but you've brought up a number of things that of course resonate with me, and this is the focus on less on the tech, and both you and I have a long career in technology and innovation, and innovative clients who are doing pretty amazing technological things. But I think at least I've learned through my career, and I'm gonna based on what stratapp's focuses on, in terms of those 4 areas that I mentioned at the very outset of our conversation, is that if you don't consider the people from the psychological perspective and the human factors perspective, you can put any amount of technology onto trying to solve an issue, and you're never going to get where you want to go. And so I wanted to kind of ask you a technical question, but if you can kind of relate it to this aspect of execution, because as you and I know, objectives and key results, or what's known as OKRs, have become very popular in the US and Europe, and those tend to be very metric oriented, and may or may not consider some of these human factor aspects that we're talking about. What do you see are some of the positive and negative trends with your clients in using OKRs?
Yeah, so it's a technology company quandary. The underlying issue here with the OKRs. So they've been around since the 90s, made famous by Google and created by Andy Grove, and then the book by John Doerr, who took it to Google. And they are absolutely brilliant for focusing, hey, sure, that's where we're heading. What are we going to get done this month or this quarter? And the problem with it, and I like to go back to the classical thinking behind the method, is you should be really just narrowing down on 2 or 3 objectives for the quarter. So if you're 500 employees, what are the 2 or 3 big goals we're trying to kick? Sure, we're running the business, we've got all these other projects, but what are the 2 or 3 big things we're going to get done this quarter? And I don't know whether it's consultants or we're trying to sell more users on OKR apps, but the rollout in the US has been this massive cascading of OKRs across 1,000 people or 5,000 people. So it's kind of taking the old KPI tracking mindset and putting it into this OKR framework, which I think delivers more bums on seats, for those licenses. And if I look ahead where that technology is going, I think on on the aggregation of KPIs, so it's, you know, the ongoing tracking of stuff you need to track, gross profit, customer satisfaction, employee satisfaction, throughput, whatever it is, number of widgets, number of franchise calls. The direction of that tech is all in the BI space. You know, so companies that can crawl across everything you've got and give you simple reports and data, that's where the tracking side's going. And companies would be better off keeping their OKR framework simple and focused, exactly as it was intended by Andy Grove, you know, and how Intel took the market and Google applied it since, is what as a company are we going to focus on for the next quarter? 2 or 3 things. And then how are we going to measure that so it's tangible, being the key results. So that's probably the sort of the negative trend I'm seeing everywhere. It's this kind of KPI mindset, old-fashioned mindset, balanced scorecard, you know, track lots of things being applied to this new framework. Problem number 1. Problem number 2 is it's been quite a token effort, right? People have been rolling out OKRs and they've gone, oh, hang on, it's contributing to these goals, right? And therefore what's happening is, because that's a mess, leadership teams are rolling out OKRs, particularly in the US, delegating it to the HR department. And again, it's becoming another, you know, people tracking thing. Yeah. It's not motivational at all. So what we've done at stratapp is we didn't start with OKRs. We started with the strategy tree and making that collaborative and live and interactive. So you're not doing a static Word doc and trying to present on PowerPoint your strategy, right? Which is how it kind of works now. Yeah. It's live and interactive at all levels in the tree. And then the work is inside the tree as well, applying those principles I talked to before about UX and collaboration. So all that latest trend for the last 10 years is now, as a UX, collaboration is inside that tree. So the benefit of this is the leaders have got somewhere to play because they never stop doing strategy. And of course, they're involving other people in the company as well. But they never stop strategizing, evolving, and coming up with new ideas involving the company. And now they've got a place to play together doing that in stratapp on the tree. And then if the OKRs are hanging off the tree, then people who are receiving the OKRs or rallying around the OKRs can see where it fits in. And you keep the leadership team interested in the OKRs for the same reason, you know, vice versa.
Well, and that's what I appreciate about your approach, is that you are incorporating much of human-centered design thinking into what can feel like a very mechanistic, very technical, you know, widget counting type of practice. But you're saying, no, we really need to do a lot of time up front to get the buy-in. So when you're doing the technical or the mechanistic aspects, people are already bought in and actively actually excited about what they're working towards, which is great.
It is. And so my thinking, I used to do those change management projects, right, at Accenture, and I've kind of drifted a little bit more to that model of, you know, success builds success. Mm-hmm. And so if the leadership team are doing the strategy in the tree, the OKRs make sense because they hang off the tree. The third thing is now to connect the work, right? So you don't want the OKRs just to be a dashboard. In stratapp, we have a beautiful dashboard and it all rolls up and there's colored lights and percentages and all the things you'd expect. One click though, you're into the work behind the OKR, and that's the magic, right? So if you can, as a leader, just jump into live meetings and tasks and project workboards, all of this activity that's taking place to deliver this thing for the quarter. If you as a leader can just be floating in there digitally, all organized, and just asking a question, giving encouragement, providing feedback, making sure the direction's good, allocating more resources, time, help, whatever. If you can do all of that, it's like the water cooler experience 24/7 magnified globally. Right, like the CEO just walking down the corridor going, really love what you guys are doing on that project.
Yeah. Well, that's again what I love about how you've designed this in such a way to really consider that we operate within human systems, is what I like to say to my graduate students. I always talk about organizations in terms of human systems to remind them that no matter how fancy our technology is, we still have, you know, I said, how many of you work in organizations that don't have any people you know. So, and you're making large consideration for your technology of how is it going to be received by the people who actually have to use it.
Totally. And think about when you join a company or take on a new role. You know, I was reading some stats only last week on this. Apparently, and if I could remember the source for you, it'd be great. So it was a good, credible source, but I remember the data. It was 67% of leaders in the US fail in coming into a new role, 67%. So that's kind of the turnover, and fail within 12 months, you get someone else. So it's kind of 2/3. And you think it takes so long also to even discover that it's not working out sometimes, you know, when you hire people into different roles. So imagine if you're coming into a digital space, and in this call so far, I've been talking about the future and getting things done for the future, but imagine if you're just coming in to run a team, a division, a business unit, or the whole company, and you can look back over the last quarter, month, 2 years of what initiatives did they work on, what were the plans, how did it go, drill down into the conversations and the meetings that were taking place, who were the rising stars, where was their agreement, what were the decisions made, go back over the approvals, all at a click of a button as you come into, as you know, because you come in, what do? You spend 3 months trying to find out what's going on, right? And you put together that magic 100-day plan, right? You know, and then you go and kick goals for 100 days to build success. And
well, it's really a lovely way to do co-creation when you are particularly in dispersed time and location, right? Places, a way to feel connected. You brought up loneliness, which is a prevailing public health issue here in the United States, and I imagine it is globally, but how this really can help people feel involved and engaged in leadership decision making, even if they may not feel that they're at a level in the organization where their opinion matters, right?
Yeah, that's right. And the other thing I learned from that Matt Mullenweg interview was Sam Harris. There's so many people that don't really want to interact in real time on all topics. It's, you know, there's so many of us that need time to think and reflect. And I think I'm becoming more like that, right, as I get older. And before I want to give my answer. So he talks about this concept of asynchronous communications. So imagine you've got everything from strategy, objectives, all the things I said before, you know, plans, projects, meetings. If it's all digital and it's all just taking place in different time zones, and it's all structured and nested, and the social has structure, you know, questions, decisions, approvals, agree, disagree, it's all in there, then you have time to reply, right? It's different to having meetings where you're trying to make rapid decisions and get 5 people's input in real time of what they can think of in that moment. You're moving to this collaboration that's becomes global and asynchronous. So people have got time to think and give their best answer. And you don't lose momentum because it's organized, right? We try to have meetings to organize the thinking and the doing, but the technology, good tech, can do that for you. So then you have time to think and get the most, and everyone gets a chance to contribute. And even those folks that sometimes are a bit quiet in meetings, you know, if someone's got a lot of
have a voice, which I love, right?
Yeah, they have voice, you know, and they can be reflective, and it's an equal voice just in the medium. And he talks to that beautifully about running WordPress globally, how that's so important. And of course, you've got 75 languages. 75 countries. I can't remember how many languages it was, at least 40. So, and they're working English. So it gives everyone a chance just to absorb and respond and contribute. And
I love that. Yeah, not only, I mean, again, I bring it back to the audience so they make the connection between the things you're mentioning in human-centered design, design thinking, adult learning principles are all things that are being incorporated into an app that's helping organizations. So I think it's amazing. Going to pivot here because one of the reasons that prompted our conversation and my reach out to you was the article that you pinned called Learning from Accenture. And really it's an insider's perspective on why Accenture has been so successful for so long and really has become, you know, recognized as the premier consulting firm. Can I say that as a former Booz Allen person? I guess I can.
You can. I'm, yeah.
I do have many Accenture friends, so maybe they'll buy me a cup of coffee. I don't know.
They should.
That really, as the world's, leading consulting organization, advising company. And so can you talk about, since you were with them and know about their early growth versus how they needed to pivot in the 90s, and since that time have had such monumental growth?
Yeah, it's an amazing story, right? They've always been the leader and the one to look up to. And I read so many articles about, and when I was working at Accenture and since, that folks analyzing, marketing campaigns and all these things, trying to understand, the magic source. And when you're on the inside, you just see it so clearly. But it takes probably 2 years to realize what's going on, And so in those early days, it was all about systemization globally. So, and we're talking back in the 80s and 90s. So imagine you're starting a project in Japan or Sweden or the US, and I bounced around those countries, and you turn up and everyone refers to everything the same way, same language, same method, same hierarchy, everything's the same. And back then, that's an incredible experience. And they spent a lot of money on travel and training and centralization of training in St. Charles near Chicago in the US. So that was the first thing. And then the second thing that spurned the growth was always to align with technology, which they've done more so than the other firms, KPMG, EY, Pricewaterhouse, etc., Coopers. To really, and Deloitte probably more so on tech, particularly SAP, but Accenture were really going hard to align with technology. And then, of course, they couldn't keep up with the growth. So there are more sales than people to do the work. So the first big pivot was well, we're finally going to have to hire experienced people. We can't grow everyone, from within. And then when you have such a strong culture where language and methods, and I'll give you an example, only one topic per voicemail. So they had this global voicemail system where you could rally a cause globally on a topic at all levels in the company, and you would see where it came from through this voicemail, but you could only articulate one topic and then that flowed over to email when email became big in the 90s. Great discipline, because then you can delegate, file, come back to, organize, So there you've got 30,000 people in the world who operate exactly the same way on voicemail and email. Huge achievement, but that's culture, right? Strength of leadership. So I was full of respect, for that, and learned heaps. And then difficult when they started hiring, senior managers and partners from other consulting firms, you can imagine, right? Who came in and, and they probably had an industry background and they're a couple of years at Pricewaterhouse or Coopers, and then they join Accenture, and then there's this culture, hey, this is how we do things. And again, they pulled that off and grew from 20 to 40,000 really quickly. And that was primarily driven through hiring experienced hires. And if they didn't do that, I wouldn't have got in, right? So, so I'm grateful. And then the next thing was to grab this outsourcing market. And their approach there, really unique and a huge investment in it. And they went from, instead of doing projects for customers and getting paid billable hours or fixed price, let's just run part of their company, right? And they learned over time, there's a different way to do the deals. So, clients didn't want to sign a 10-year contract they couldn't get out of. So how do we agree performance-based lines and metrics so you make money and we make money? Or we both win on the savings or the value we bring to the deal. So lots of smarts around that. But this philosophy of let's just get in there and get started because we'll win more. And that really proved true. And I think the benefits were beyond anyone's belief. So now I think there's 500,000 employees.
That's amazing. Yeah.
It's incredible, right?
Yeah.
And most of that is running operations on behalf of clients.
Yeah.
So then you start to think, wow, what's next? You end up winning non-competitive consulting work left, right, and center, right? So if you're in there running finance, IT, logistics,
you become kind of a backbone of these companies.
Yeah. And then if you So if you run logistics, I did one major project in the UK. So for Sears, right? So they had 18 brands on the high street, including Selfridges, the massive department store there, Oxford Street.
Mhm.
So 18 brands, and you come in and you take over running the logistics function, administration and ordering and all of the scheduling. And then once you've mastered that for one retail brand in one country, then you just go to Germany, France, US, right? And then you also start picking up the best people in the world in those sectors, and you're elevating them as thought leaders, advisors, consultants, and winning more deals. And so that strategic pivot, which folks really underestimate, and I think hugely relevant today. So just take accounting firms under pressure from automation, and everyone's predicting it'll all be automated, right?
Yeah.
They're leaving bookkeeping and financial functions on the table with all their client base. It's so crazy, right? And if you think of Accenture, and then there's heaps of firms in this BPO market now, which is matured, of course, right? They really need 25 minimum, but preferably 100 seats on a deal just to make it all work, from cost of sale and overhead and management and everything else, right? Because they're at that scale now. So if you're running an accounting practice or professional services practice, and you can come in and pick up 5 seats and run it on behalf of a client because you can do it better and you've got tech, then you can pick up another 5 somewhere else. On a small level, you can apply exactly the same levels and have all of the upside that Accenture's created, right? So deeper relationship with your client, more non-competitive work, better understanding what's going on, and recurring revenue. Put a price on recurring revenue when you go to sell the business, right? It's huge.
Yeah.
And
those are great examples of how Accenture pivoted. And as you mentioned, Accenture is quite big, and you gave a great example. So you talk about how those strategic pivots at Accenture can be used in smaller consulting firms and professional service organizations, which is great. And how can the insights that you gleaned at Accenture, including the pivot, be applied to companies who are seeking to really rethink the way they emerge after the pandemic?
I think the key principle behind that Accenture model is companies want to focus on what they're really, really good at and what they do really well. So that means businesses that serve companies, professional services firms, whether it be law, accounting, finance, consulting, if they think the same way, right, our client needs to focus on what they're really, really good at, which has been a trend in business for 40 years. And the other trend is technology is changing, and stratapp, key part of that, but next step on collaboration. And then you've got brilliant resources for offshoring, particularly the Philippines. Great English, great ethics, education, high education, and easy to set up your operations there. So, if I was operating any professional services firm, I'd be thinking really hard around what are we good at, what are we interested in, and what could we take over on behalf of the client and add value to them, do it at a price point better than they can, take into account everything, overheads, management, equipment, office, the whole thing, and package that up and rely on scale. So each client gets a better price point. They also get better IP and acceleration of change. And we make our money through doing this for more clients in more sectors internationally on recurring revenue. So I mentioned bookkeeping before, it's an obvious one, but you can extend from bookkeeping to accounts payable, accounts receivable. You can just take over the whole finance function. And then you can look at logistics. How's the client run that side of the business? Other aspects of supply chain, look at operations. Technology is another one. It's a huge headache for customers, right? So you got all these IT services firms, particularly in Australia and the US. Yeah. And now you have digital automation firms and workflow, particularly in the US, who are doing more and more automated. But again, it's all project work, right? So the lesson from Accenture is how do you move away from project work to you're running part of the client's business for them at a price better than they can, because it's non-core, non-strategic, important, but it's not their reason for being, right? It's important, it's fundamental, could be critical, but it's not their reason for being. So you're doing that better than they could do themselves, bringing learnings from other clients and the changes you're learning yourself because you're niching. Do more and more of that on recurring revenue model, and you de-stress your own business, and then the rising stars out of that become advisors and rainmakers for that sector globally.
Yeah.
And I think any company can do that who are
think
providing a B2B service to another company.
Yeah, I think that's great parallels between what you learned at Accenture and the insights, and how companies right now can rethink and reimagine their way forward. I also have seen companies who have done quite well as they've been rethinking and re-strategizing, doing more partnering, and you brought up that we're working in a very different culture than when you and I maybe started our careers, and that there's more receptivity to partnerships. And so let's say you have functional knowledge in finance, and you do work with another company that is adept in another area, like in fintech, right? So you partner and you go into different corporations and pitch, and there could be an imminent merger and acquisition opportunity down the line if that I know Accenture's good at that.
No, they are. And I think, again, that market is maturing above 100 seats. It's just getting harder and harder, right? So Accenture's having to go, their next plan to win in that whole BPO operations market is to innovate on tech back to their starting point, right? So they'll do more and more on automating and adding value so that the outsourced service costs less and less for the client. But Accenture are not the only folks that will be doing that. I think the benefit to Accenture particularly is it will always feed more consulting work. The fact that they've got this outsourcing operations engine, and even though they're up against other BPO companies that are just doing BPO, they've got this advantage that they can create so much value doing consulting. So it's just this kind of pivot where the profit comes from. And interestingly, profit is not always company valuation on that model, because the recurring revenue is worth so much on the outsourcing deals, which may be, of course, lower margin, but it's worth a lot on value because it's predictable income.
Yeah. And we just scratched the surface on your article and the wonderful things that I was able to gain from it, but we will make sure that we provide a link below so that you all will have access to not only Ash's article, but his other ways to get in touch with him at stratapp. I've got one concluding question, but I wanted to first thank you in advance for your time and just sharing not only your perspective of navigating through COVID and some tips on for folks to think about as we're trying to reimagine what this future could bring, and bringing in those insights from your own career at Accenture has been quite nice to hear from you. But my concluding question to you is, given everything that you've seen, heard, experienced over the last year, what might be some final thoughts, words of wisdom that you would like to share as we all collectively, I think we're going full circle around the globe tonight. I'm from Washington, D.C., and you're there in Australia. When you think about how we might co-create this society for us, what are some words of wisdom that you might embark on us?
Well, the question's probably above my pay grade, really. How to solve the world, and I think I'll go to Gary Vee. Really, the positivity wins, full stop, and it just wins for us every day, working on product and problems, or trying to win a client or get a partner going on the product, and also working with each other on what we're trying to solve. So nothing beats just being positive the whole time. And therefore, you've got to do whatever it takes to stay positive which can be really hard if you're locked up in a lockdown and with a lot of restrictions, et cetera, et cetera. So the basics, it's back to basics. And, you know, I've got some great coaches in this household here, you know, with a European mindset. So that basics of cooking well and investing a lot of time in eating organic and cooking well and pleasing the body and mind with food, exercise, and not drinking too much, which can be a problem in COVID. And it's certainly a problem in Australia that we love to drink, and being locked up all day is no good, right? So, not that we don't have lockdown, but there's certainly restrictions, and so I think being positive and looking after your health, and that means exercise and eating well and socially. And then from an international point of view, it's just hard to see where it's all going to land. I think cultures of companies just want to revert back as quickly as they can to how it was before. That's my honest view of that. The practical change will come from employees asking for more flexibility. And now you can trust me, let me do this. And that's what we're already seeing. So what else happens in that space, I think it'll be down to how the pandemic is managed, and then travel, and that'll have an impact on all of us in terms of collaborating globally and so forth. And then, you know, lastly is cultures just need to look after their fellow citizens, you know. And again, I look to Scandinavia, I look to Germany and France and Australia to that extent too, you know, and New Zealand, you know, just this mindset that we've just got to look after everyone, and a lot of things need to be free for that to work for the good of everyone. And there's just so much to learn. And I know he's controversial, but you know, Michael Moore, that film, what's it? I'm going to Conquer the World. Is that the film where he goes around with the?
Yeah, I can't recall the specific title, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and he says, I'm here to take the best idea from each country. And for me, you know, I think finishing with that thought, there's just so much to learn from each country around the world, and a bit of inspiration for all of us.
Yeah, well, I'm soaking in those words of wisdom, because I think they're all something that we can take to heart right now, and we need more and more positive change agents in all forms and fashions, and so I appreciate that very much. And I think that, you know, this conversation, as I suspected, resonated with me, because not only are you just an awesome person to talk to, but just you know, understanding that technology can be driven with you know, the human heart considered. And so I hope that resonated with folks as well, to see how you've taken big firm experience, what you learned from that, from a, you know, hardcore business perspective, and created something now that's really doing pretty tremendous things to balance the social, the technical. And so I appreciate it very much.
Yeah, we've got to bring everyone together on the journey, and then share the success together, you know, and bottom up engagement. I think that's the answer.
I vouch, when the pandemic's over, I will come to do our next part 2 of this interview in Australia. So
we can do it at the beach behind me.
That's right. I would like that very much. So Ash Richardson from stratapp, I am so appreciative of your time. We will provide contact information below. And are you accepting LinkedIn invitations, if that's one way they'd like to get a hold of you?
Yeah, sure. No problem. And then obviously all the mediums on the website we respond to, and we're fairly hands-on with the onboarding as well. So we don't just leave the client to figure it out themselves. We have a couple of quick workshops, but nothing like the Accenture days. I'm talking like 1-hour workshops, and then help people get started. So it's light and easy, really.
Excellent. Well, I enjoyed our time together, and I look forward to hopefully visiting with you very soon.
Look forward to that, Kelly. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.